Alright, today we're going to be talking about quadratic formulas. So there are a couple different ways to solve a quadratic equation, and remember a quadratic equation is an equation that has a square, so an x squared for example. The first way is through factoring, which is what we focused on during Unit 2, Part 1. The second way is quadratic formula, and the way or the reason why you might want to use the quadratic formula is because sometimes you can't factor an equation, you can't get an answer by factoring, whereas the quadratic formula will always work, it's just a little bit more computational work. So before we talk about the quadratic equation, the first thing I want to talk about is the discriminant. So the discriminant is just a specific part of the quadratic equation, and that's b squared minus 4ac. So that's the formula for the discriminant. You'll notice, so if we look down here at the quadratic formula, the b squared minus 4ac is the part that's underneath the square root. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And you don't need to memorize that. That formula will be given to you. You just need to know how to use it. So to use the quadratic formula, you want to make sure that you write your equation in standard form, which means that you have ax squared plus bx plus c. So basically, everything should be set equal to 0, and you want it to be in order from highest exponent to lowest exponent. So you want to go from x squared x to the constant. Then you're going to identify your a, b, and c, and then substitute them into the formula. And lastly, you're going to simplify. So let's look at number 1, x squared plus 2x minus 63. So it's set equal to 0 already. It's in standard form. I've got the x squared, the 2x, and the constant, negative 63. So I can go ahead and identify my a, my b, and my c. So we've got a is the number in front of the x squared. Since there is no number, you know it's going to be a 1. B is 2, and c is negative 63. Before we put it into the formula, I always like to break it up into the discriminant, and then I'll plug the discriminant back into the formula. So the discriminant is b squared minus 4ac, and I'm going to put parentheses around every value that I'm plugging in. So it's going to be 1 squared, I was looking at the wrong number, it's b squared. So 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 63. So b squared, that's where the 2 came from, a is 1, and then c is negative 63. You're going to plug that all into your calculator, parentheses and all. So I'm going to go ahead and take out my calculator. So you've got 2 parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses 1 parentheses negative 63, and that's going to equal 256. All right, now we're going to plug it into the quadratic formula. So quadratic formula tells you x equals negative b, so negative 2, plus or minus the square root. We already found what b squared minus 4ac is. That was 256, all over 2 times a, which is 1. Next up, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to find out what is the square root of 256. And if you remember to 2.4, if you remember 2.4, it tells you how to, or it lists out all the perfect squares, so that's how I knew that 256 is the perfect square. So it's negative 2 plus or minus 16, all divided by, I'm also going to multiply 2 times 1, which is 2. Alright, this is going to split up into two different equations because they're a plus or minus. You've got the negative 2 plus 16 divided by 2, and the negative 2 minus 16 divided by 2. Alright, let's put the first one in our calculator. It's really important that you do the numerator separately from the denominator. So first do negative 2 plus 16, and make sure you press enter after, otherwise your calculator is going to give you the wrong answer. So it's 14, and then you can just press 14 divided by 2, which is 7. Same thing for the bottom. You're going to do negative 2 minus 16 equals negative 18 divided by 2 is negative 9. So for this one, you have two solutions. X equals negative 9 and x equals 7. Oops, you can't see that. There you go. All right, let's try number 2. So number 2, negative x squared plus 2x is equal to 1. Your first step is to make sure that it's all set equal to 0. So you want to move everything to the side that already has the x squared, so you want to move the 1 over. When you move the 1 over, it's going to change from a positive 1 to a negative 1, and it's set equal to 0 now. Now you can go ahead and find your a, b, and your c. Your a is the number in front of the x squared. Since there is no number, it's a 1, but since it's a negative in front, it's going to be negative 1. B is the number in front of the x, so 2, and c is the constant, so negative 1. First, find your b squared minus 4ac. Make sure you put parentheses around everything you're plugging in, so 2 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 1. And that just goes directly into your calculator. So it's going to be parentheses 2 squared minus 4 times negative 1 times negative 1 equals 0. So your discriminant is 0. All right, now we're going to plug it into quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, so negative 2 plus or minus the square root of your discriminant, which is 0, all over 2 times a, which is negative 1. Then we're going to do the square root and the denominator. So negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 0 is just 0 divided by negative 2. In this case, I could break it up to negative 2 plus 0, negative 2 minus 0, but I know that if I add or subtract 0, it doesn't make a difference. So that's just going to be negative 2 in the numerator and negative 2 in the denominator, which is equal to 1. So x is just equal to 1. There's only one solution for this problem. All right, let's go ahead and flip the page. So we've got negative 8x squared plus 7 equals 4. So you want to make sure that you move everything over to the other side. You want to find the x squared and move everything to that side. So it's negative 8x squared plus 7. Positive 4 changes to a negative 4 equals 0. You'll notice that 7 and 4 are like terms, so you can subtract. 7 minus 4 is 3, which equals 0. Find your a, b, and your c. So your a is negative 8. Your b, I don't see an x term here that's missing, so I know my b is going to be 0, and my c is 3. All right, find your discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. Make sure you put parentheses around everything you're plugging in. So it's going to be 0 squared minus 4 times negative 8 times c, which is 3. So we've got parentheses 0 squared minus 4 times negative 8 times 3, which gives you 96. All right, now we're going to plug it into quadratic formula. So x equals negative b, so negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 96 divided by 2 times a, which is negative 8. All right, here is where you'll notice that, so we're going to do two things. We're going to multiply out the denominator, and we're going to find the square root of 96. But you'll notice that 96 is not a perfect square. So just like we did in 2.4, we're going to have to figure out what is the biggest perfect square that will go in to 96. So what's the biggest perfect square that will go into 96? That's going to be 16 and times 6. So I can break up 96 into 16 times 6. All divided by 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. So this is going to give us negative 0 plus or minus the square root of 16 is 4. 6 has to stay underneath the radical. All divided by negative 16. Alright, from here we can rewrite this. Because it's a 0 in front, that doesn't affect anything, right? Because adding or subtracting a 0 doesn't make a difference. So this is going to be plus or minus 4 square root of 6 over negative 16. You can simplify this because 4 and 16 can both be simplified by 4. I know there's a negative 16 in the denominator, but because we have this plus or minus in front of the 4, it doesn't really affect it. So we're going to do 4 divided by 4, which is just 1, so I don't need to write a coefficient for that. And then 16 divided by 4 is 4. So this is going to be plus or minus square root of 6 over 4. And that's your final answer. All right, number 4, it's already set equal to 0, so negative 3x squared plus 8x minus 7 is equal to 0. So you just have to identify your a, b, and your c. Your a is negative 3, your b is 8, and your c is negative 7. Discriminant is b squared minus 4ac. So that is 8 squared minus 4 times negative 3 times negative 7. Take out your calculator. So you've got parentheses 8 squared minus 4 parentheses negative 3 times negative 7, which is negative 20. So then you're going to plug that discriminant back into the quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of negative 20 all over 2 times a, which is negative 3. All right, go ahead and simplify the square root. So anytime you've got a square root of a negative number, you need to take out an I. Square root of 20 all over negative 6. Square root of 20, that can be split up into the perfect squares of 4 and 5 all over negative 6. The square root of 4 is 2, so that's 2i square root of 5 over negative 6. Remember, the real number has to go first, then the imaginary number, then the square root. And then you're going to ask yourself, okay, can I simplify this any further? So look at all the coefficients, 8, 2, and 6. Can they be simplified? Yes, 2 would go into all of those. So negative 8 divided by 2 would give you negative 4, plus or minus. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. I square root of 5 divided by negative 3. And that's your final answer. All right, the last one, number 5, 6x squared minus 11x minus 10 equals 0. Already set equal to 0, so you can find your a, your b, and your c, and find your discriminant. So 6 squared minus, not 6 squared, excuse me, b squared. So negative 11 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 10. So again, negative 11 squared minus 4 times 6 times negative 10. Go ahead and put that in your calculator. $361. All right, so go ahead and plug your discriminant back into quadratic formula. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of 361 all over 2 times a, which is 6. 361 is a perfect square. The square root of 361 is 19 divided by 12. Split this up excuse me, into 2 separate equations. So 11 plus 19 divided by 2, 11 minus 19 divided by 2. 11 plus 19 is going to be 30 divided by 2, which is equal to 15. And then 11 minus 19 is negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. So x equals negative 4, comma 15.